Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healer specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you diddling, Ken? How's your diddle, as we say in this part of the world?
I'm diddling very well. Thanks for asking, Rory. Both Rory and I hope that you are well. You've joined us for episode 267 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. 3 topics today, all interesting, starting off with building your CV as a counsellor. That's in theory and practice. We then move into practice today, protecting yourself as a therapist, and then a really interesting interview today from a non-counsellor, I believe, on choosing an interpreter, Rory.
Absolutely, and we're always grateful of those who give their time for this section of the podcast. But I think this particular interview is very timely, is super important, and we interview Eniko, who is an interpreter, and in service, I think, of clients who may not speak English or English may not be their first language. So please stay around for that super important piece of conversation.
So let's dig into that theory and practice, building your counselling CV.
Yes, well, I think it's a timely topic to talk about. In real time, we're recording this in the late May of 2023, and there will be people listening to this who are coming to the end of their courses, their diploma courses or their degree courses, who will be leaving education, formal first training education, and going in looking for jobs. And it's really important that we think about what needs to go on a CV to make you appealing, to get you shortlisted into a job, or to give you at least, as we say in my part of the world, a fighting chance. There seems to be a lot of fighting in my part of the world, a fighting chance of getting on a shortlist. And I think that getting that discipline of, putting your professional development, your professional formation onto a piece of paper in a structured way is really important. And in fact, it's really useful. I was just thinking about this. It's really useful if you're a student going on to the next level, of course, because you may have to formally apply to a course, and to put your information onto a CV to give to a course tutor if you're going on to the next level may be very, very, very useful for someone to understand who they're taking on. So yes, a curriculum vitae, a condensed document of your experience and the skills you've got that may possibly be useful for a job or even a placement, Ken.
Yeah, I remember going through this exercise myself, Rory, and looking at my former CV and realizing it had absolutely nothing in it that was going to be of use in the counselling world. It was all about sales and marketing, and it was pretty lengthy. So what I did was kind of really condense that down into other, and then started thinking hard about my counselling journey. And I think it's important here to maybe look at what kind of topics, what are you going to put in a CV? And I think a CV should reflect who you are. I think it should reflect what your values are. It maybe should reflect what your why is, why you do what you do. And sometimes it can be pretty tricky, specifically if you may be a student and just maybe going out, touching the world for the first time. But have a think about your past and what led you into counselling. Think about your interpersonal skills that you have, your understanding of standards and ethics that are required in counselling and psychotherapy. How about your own self-awareness? What do you do? What is your way of kind of staying up to date and with your own personal development? What is your commitment to learning, to your personal, your professional development? So even as a student, let's say, for instance, you've done some CPD, you're going to be marking that down and showing that prospective employer or the next level course what it is that you're interested in and the areas that you're going and researching in. And then maybe consider your own mental toughness and your perseverance, because counseling can be a job where we are receiving a lot of other people's difficulties. How do you carry that? What do you do for your own self-care? Maybe speak about your own mental toughness and perseverance in there.
Absolutely. And I think your why and your philosophy is massively important, because that really speaks to the compassion that our profession demands. It's not just a job, it's a vocation. And I know that there's some people who say, I wish we could be paid more. Totally agree with that. No letters in the postbag, please. But it is ultimately a vocation. The why, someone who's been involved in employing counsellors, the why is really important. We're interested, or our panel was very interested in what brought someone to counselling. What was it that they wanted? Why did they want to be a helper? And I think that told a lot of the story of the person. It gave us a really good holistic view of the person. And then, of course, we'd look on things like qualifications, any trainings they'd done, professional memberships. And I'm actually looking at the free handout. And if you want the free handout, go to Counselling Tutor. Go to episode 267. Our website's counsellingtutor.com. Find the podcast tab, 267, and there's a handout here for you, which will be really, really useful. And one of the questions I was asked is hobbies and interests. Have you got any hobbies? In fact, it was the first question. And I was totally stumped by this. And I said, well, I'm a photographer. I like taking pictures. And the reason they asked that, it was about self-care. They wanted to know that did I have any other kind of interests outside of counselling. It's an holistic document. And I want to pick up actually on what you said earlier, where you said that you had lots of experience, but none of it relevant to counselling. I want to issue a challenge there, Ken. I bet you had a driver's license. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Drive.
I was a salesman on the road, Rory.
Right, there you go. So you could drive. So there's your first transferable skill. Yeah. Yeah. Second is you work with people. Yeah, you work with people, so that wasn't an alien thing to you. You work with people. Oh yeah, maybe you're in sales, but you still work with people. Presumably, you turned up on time to your appointments as a salesman. Ken's nodding. He's going, yes, that's me. and presumably at some point you use some kind of IT, some kind of computer equipment, mobile phones. All those are transferable skills. So don't think that your job is so far away from the counselling role that you want that there's no skills that are transferable. Just go through your CV with a pen and just put T next to the skills that are transferable and just transfer those over onto your counselling CV.
I like that, Rory, and that was a worthy challenge that you laid there. And in just speaking about that, I'm thinking back to what my CV used to look like, and it honestly just used to be a list of job titles and some of the stuff that I did within those roles. And what you're saying is look at the skills. So not necessarily the job, but what are the skills that you used within that job that may be transferable, that may be prized within counselling, working as part of a team. If you're working in an agency and we're working in a part of a team, that's one of them. And I guess one of the things, so we're talking qualifications, work experience, your CPD training, your skills and your knowledge that goes into the CV. But a CV is a document that opens a door. It maybe gets your bum in a seat, maybe for an interview. It's unlikely that a CV will land a job all on its own, land you a job. They'll want to speak to you about it. And I think that when you're crafting your CV, it's worth crafting it in a way that each of the things you place in your CV, you can talk about that with passion. Because likely, if it does get through to an interview process, they might be referring to your CV and say, tell me a little bit more about that. So if you kind of plan your CV with the areas of passion that you have, that you can talk about and be informed, that is a great tip, I guess.
It is, Ken, absolutely. And to develop that, there is a bit of a secret sauce for this. I would be putting on my areas of research.
Yes.
Any areas of research. So every student has an area of research that they're usually, in my experience, our experience as tutors, Ken, really passionate about. It's something that they're really passionate. And we've seen some wonderful short pieces of research delivered as part of courses. What areas of research are you interested in? And that tells a prospective employer or a placement two things. One is that your interest in counselling isn't static. It doesn't suspend itself at the minute you get your qualification. You're curious, you're going out, you're looking for areas that you're passionate about. And also, is that research a good fit for the organisation? They may be looking for someone, they may be thinking, oh, we could commission some research. Your CV lands. And here's an example. We run an online and telephone counselling course to help people who want to work online. It's a specific discipline and we run a specific qualification. And I am sure that if you said that you're doing research into online and telephone counselling, there are lots of organisations out there who may be on the cusp of commissioning research, saying, we could do with finding out more about this and getting an authoritative policy on it, training our staff. And if you say this is your area of interest and you're developing that area, it doesn't have to be this. It could be any area. It could be trauma, could be working with specific refugee groups. It's a whole tranche of areas of research. Your interest instantly going to be more appealing. But make sure that you're doing that research. Don't just write it down. You just come apart at the interview, And I think that's really important. And certainly in my latter years as a tutor, one of the things, when I was interviewing tutors, one of the things we asked them was what areas of research were you doing in your teaching practice?
Yeah.
This is now a standard question, I think, in the professions. Interested in what's next. That's always a big thing, I think. What's next? What are you doing next?
I like that. And I guess if we were going for top tips here, when applying maybe for a placement at an agency, you may be sending in a CV. Maybe if you're applying for a job, you'll be sending in a CV. And personally, Rory, I wouldn't send the same CV twice. And the reason for that, because this is all about frame of reference. Frame of reference, it's not about what I want to tell them. It's about what do they want to hear. So I'll have my base CV, so kind of written out, but then I would go and research the organization that CV was going to. I would look at who they are, look at their about page. Do they have a vision? Do they have a mission? Do they have a set of values? Do they match mine? Do they align in some way? Does the client group that they serve in some way align with any CPD that I've done or anything I could say? And including a letter with your CV is always a good idea of why you are putting your CV forward. And you can mention relevant topics there that are relevant to that agency, that organization. And you can weave that through your CV. You can become creative, and I don't mean creative as in telling lies. I mean creative as in how you put over and what you choose. I mean, if I had to list my CPD, Rory, that I've done over the last 10 years, it would be a very long CV. So I might put regular CPD, including, and I might just choose and handpick the topics that I think might resonate with that organization. So this, again, from the handout, the first question to ask is not what do I want to tell them, but what will they want to know about me and my journey to see if I'm a fit for that organization.
Such a good point. And the first stop to help develop that is to have a look at the company or organization that you're applying to, and have a look at their values. Most organizations now will list their values, our values, what we stand for. Have a look. And if your values align with the organization, make an awareness of that. I stand for this, which aligns with your values. You say this, and this is what I think, because more and more in the world of work, certainly in our work, I think it's a values match. People are looking for a values match because values drive organizations. It's, we've gone past the stage now of just looking at the work. It's the values, to be able to, when the going gets tough, that people can fall back on the values and say, this is what we do, this is what we stand for. And that makes such a difference in people's lives, I think. Certainly the people we serve.
Very, very much so. So that's kind of an overview of CVs, but now we're going to delve into the structure, the actual structure of writing a CV. And the reality is, and I heard this on a talk radio station just yesterday, Rory, it was somebody speaking about going for an engineering job and mentioning that there were 180 other applicants for that job. Now, I hazard a guess that nobody sat and read 180 CVs from start to finish. So when you are structuring your CV, what you want to be focusing on are headings, and then also highlighting or bolding some of the words. What you're kind of looking for is, if somebody scans it, if somebody just looks over it, are they able to get a gist of who you are, your values, what you stand for, your why, and how you fit their organization? Because they're going to scan it first, looking at those headings and words that stand out. And you want to be in the I'm going to read this in full pile, rather than the nah, not that one pile. And I guess just a big block of text on a page can be overwhelming to read, specifically if you have a number to go through. So headings, bolding, that if it is scanned over, they stand out and kind of give the essence of who you are.
Absolutely. Just a shorthand, just a scanned document to allow someone just to look at it very quickly and go, yeah, lock in to those things that you have, those abilities, those qualities you have, and say, this could be our person. And I guess the other thing is to get it proofread, because I mean, I'm a legendary, brilliant speller and writer. I mean, people speak little else about the accuracy of my spelling. I'm dyslexic. I'm just, it just doesn't work for me, spelling. So if I write anything, I give it to someone who actually can spell and use grammar to have a look at it. And I use, a number of tools now, Grammarly, and there's a number of spell checks to make sure that it presents itself to neurotypical people who, are looking for accuracy in Grammarly. I would declare at an interview that I am dyslexic. I think that's only fair. And I would expect that would be taken into consideration, because, neurodiversity is a thing in our society now. Not everybody is the same. But yes, get it spell checked and read it out loud to yourself. And it's amazing when you read something out loud, you pick the spelling mistakes up so much more quicker than when you read it to yourself internally. It's just one of those strange human things, Ken.
It is. And you can, there's some great screen readers. My daughter, Kristen, put me onto one called Speechify. And it reads, you can type something on your screen and it'll read it to you. And it's free. It's really great. And hearing it back, certainly for myself, it kind of challenges me to revisit what I've written and maybe structure it differently. It looked great when I wrote it, but we're hearing it back, it doesn't flow the same way. So we've now got our spelling and our grammars right. Something to make clear in your CV is how they can get hold of you. And so a structure that we have in the handout is that you would start off with your name and a little bit about you, a paragraph about yourself, and then the very next thing you want, and it's there on that first page, is your contact details. What you don't want is somebody looking over your CV going, wow, this Rory chap seems to be a spiffing fellow.
True.
Oh, yes, I like that. Oh, how do we get hold of... Oh, I can't find how to get... Oh, you know what? Let me go on to the next CV.
Yeah.
Make it clear how to get hold of you. And don't be afraid to put in your CV why you feel that you'd be a great fit for that specific job. Now, you can put that with a covering letter that goes with it as well. But it's okay to be bold and say, I can really see myself in your organization because, and it may be a specialist interest area for you or something like that. But say you want the work.
Absolutely. I mean, make sure that you say why you want the job, and what excites you about it, because passion is a massive thing in the world of work. I mean, it's someone's passionate about the work, it means that they're happy in the work, generally happy in the work, and that you're going to approach it in very creative ways and be very thoughtful and be really engaged in the work. So it's good for them, and not to put too fine a point on it, it's good for the people who are employing you, because they want switched on, committed people to do the work. And here's one little tip: it's sometimes in the detail. When I went for a job as a support worker, and I wrote in my CV that I had a car that was regularly serviced. And I thought that would give me a little bit, because how many people write in the CV, I have a car that's regularly serviced? and they said to me, why have you written your car's regularly serviced? And I said, well, I kind of wouldn't want to break down if I was going to see a client.
Oh, clever.
And he said, oh, right. Right. And also I put things like I have a regular eye test. I have an 18-month eye test. Well, last year I have an 18-month eye test. Again, shows that you're a serious person in every aspect of your life. And she said, you would be surprised how many visits we have to cancel because cars break down. And of course, I got the job. I just thought it was really important to say that, if you're using anything to help in the service of the people you're supporting, then say why. Say the why. It's the why. I have it, it's my car service, so it works.
Yes.
Hopefully it'll work every day. Yeah.
I like that. I like that you put in... Well, what you're saying there is you bring a little bit of you into your CV. It's not just a list of your history. It's about who you are. It's about you as a person. And just as we said earlier, you're putting in topics that start conversations. And that's what a CV does. You're handing something over and you are starting a conversation. You're saying, here am I. And you want them to reply to that and go, oh, I want to know more. I want to speak to you. I want to ask you about this. And that's the passion around speaking about your CV when you're in the room. And I guess, you got to get this handout. Rory has built a really nice handout on this. It's really comprehensive. It's even got a layout of how you should lay everything out. It covers what should go into your covering letter and all of that kind of stuff. It's building your counselling CV. You will find it by going to counsellingtutor.com. Click on the podcast tab. Go to episode 267. Go and download that. And here's the thing. Your counselling experience or your study experience as being a counsellor, maybe you won't go out to become a counsellor. Maybe that's not your end goal. But it's still absolute gold putting your training, putting your CPD experience on your CV, no matter what job you're going for, because counselling is a listening skill.
Yeah, absolutely. Put your whole self into the CV and, hopefully that CV will land in the right place, and it can be a life changer. That can be the first day of the rest of your life. So, don't skimp on when you're doing your CV. Pay attention to detail, and you never know, it might be the key that unlocks the door.
Like it. Thanks for bringing that topic, Rory. That is Theory in Practice. Theory to Practice is proudly sponsored by CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to counsellingskillsacademy.com. Moving away from theory and practice into practice today, protecting yourself as a therapist, Rory. Is this all about self-defense lessons?
It is. We're doing a kung fu course at Counselling Tutor. No, interesting. The reason I brought this is something that's been simmering in my mind for a long time, and recently there's been a spate of posts on social media, and indeed a conversation I've had with a colleague, which has spurred me on to bring this as a topic to share with you, the listener. And in the Facebook group, and for those of you who don't know, we have a Facebook group. If you go to Counselling Tutor, if you type Counselling Tutor into Facebook, you'll find us. Come on in and join the party. There's lots of us in there talking about topics. One of the topics that regularly comes up is inappropriate contacts that are made to therapists. And I don't want to be too egregious with this. And fair warning, I'm going to be talking of slightly adult themes here. But recently in one of the Facebook groups I'm in, there was someone who's talking about getting themselves a separate phone for their practice, and particularly one that didn't have WhatsApp on. Now, WhatsApp, for those of you who don't know, is a communication tool. You can make phone calls, you send texts, you send pictures, but also people can phone you up for video. People can video phone you. And one therapist had a phone call, and tellingly, it was a private number. I will come back to that. It was a withheld number. And when she answered it, it was a man pleasuring himself. Mm. How shocking. Mm. How unacceptably shocking. Yeah. And there seems to be a lot more of this going on in our profession. It seems that maybe there's more tools that people can contact therapists with now, and it seems to be there's a spate. I was at some training about 18 months ago, and there was about 10 or 15 of us in the room, and someone was saying, I just need to share this. There's this person who's phoned up and they've been asking about this particular paraphilic kink, if you like. Yeah. And they weren't wanting therapy for it. They were wanting a different form of service, shall we say that. And most of the people in that room, namely the women, had all had the same phone call off the same person, or it was the same theme. So they were thinking it was the same person. So the first lesson is, I think, think about answering withheld numbers. I never answer withheld number. I let it go to voicemail. If people want to speak to me, they'll leave a message, which is fine. I can get back to them. But I don't tend to answer withheld numbers, because every time I've answered withheld numbers, it has usually been someone who has another, shall we say, let's be charitable, another form of difficulty, which another service would have been better set to help them. So that's the first thing. And also, I think that as a group of people, we tend to be very empathic. Again, in the Facebook group, there was somebody who had a client who was asking to have therapy. This is online therapy, where the client was naked. And Ken's scratching his face there. Now, I'm going to give full kudos to the person who brought this. They really wanted to help this person. They really, really wanted to, and they were talking about how could this be facilitated? Is this a good thing? And it struck me, with the best will in the world to that person, the very best will in the world, that as an empathic profession, sometimes we slide our boundaries. I'm damn sure that if I turned up at my dentist in the buff, they'd show me the door. I'm sure if I turned up at my doctor's with no clothes on, that I may be seeing a different service. And I think that it's fair that as professional people that we say, no, that's not acceptable. It's not a case of being disrespectful for the client. Culturally, and I make this point, culturally, it's not acceptable to turn up for a professional appointment with no clothes on. Yeah, it just isn't. Now, there may be some therapists who want to facilitate that, or there may be. I'm going to kind of think out of the box here. There may be a certain form of therapy where it's conducted where people don't have any clothes, and I've never come across it, but there could be something out there. But I do think we need to think about our boundaries. And as someone who worked teaching criminology and who worked in the criminal justice system, this is the truth of the matter. predators go after empathic people.
Yep.
That's the truth. That's the truth. I have sat in front of people who have done, I will again be thoughtful. Their behaviours have been appalling. I won't list the behaviours, but one of the things that the pattern is that they've got away with it because the people have been over empathic, too kind to them, not thoughtful.
Yeah. It's horrific, you know, having to discuss this and thinking about it. But we take these topics that are brought up in the Facebook group. So you're talking about it. So we as colleagues will have a chat about it. I think protecting ourselves as therapists are really important. And you started off by speaking about phones. I remember when we were teaching together, we very, very strongly advised our students not to use their personal phone at all in the agency or within their placement or wherever it may be, because it is just that. It is your personal phone. Your counselling life and your personal life are very separate, and they need to remain separate for our own self-care and for us to be able to best serve our clients. It's a very structured, contracted activity, counselling. You don't want your phone going at 3 o'clock in the morning or when you're with your family to have to switch roles. So having a dedicated number that is exclusively for your therapy service is a great idea. And then the other consideration that came up for me is your home. If you are seeing clients from your home, just be mindful around how that is handled. How the person gets into you and away from you. Are you there on your own? Is there anybody else that if you ran into difficulty that you could call to? And if not, what is a plan that you might think about and put into place? And I know that in considering this during my studies, there are certain agencies that will have a little button underneath the desk that you can push, and it will turn a light on in reception or ring a bell somewhere to let you know that you may be in a little bit of difficulty and somebody would come in. But think about if you are seeing clients lone working, going somewhere, and it's just you going to see that person, that you put something in place. And what kind of thing could we put in place there, Rory, for lone working?
Well, I'm glad you brought this up, Ken. I think that you need a check-in and check-out procedure. Very simple. You have a buddy. When the client comes, you just text and say, client's in. And then when they go, you text and say, client's out. And more to the point, if that text isn't received, your buddy has a clear protocol of action. So if that isn't done, you phone them up and you see if they're okay, because people do forget. You don't get any answer, then the next is you might want to call the police. And I certainly have done this when I was a senior support worker. We had in the evening when I was driving home, I would hear the text going of people who were signing out. They would come up on my screen on my car, and people would be signing out of their jobs. And one particular time, someone didn't sign out. The client he was seeing was quite high risk. There was a risk assessment in. I couldn't raise the guy, so I called the cops. Yeah. And the cops went round to his house, and he was sat watching telly, and he wasn't very pleased. And he wasn't very pleased with me, and the police weren't very pleased with me. But I said, that's why we have a procedure. What would have happened, and as I said this to the police officer, I said, what would have happened if I hadn't have activated that emergency policy and that person was never seen again? Which brings me very neatly, Ken, onto the Susie Lamplugh Trust. I did some training many years ago with the Susie Lamplugh Trust, and people may not remember Susie Lamplugh, but she was an estate agent, a UK-based estate agent in London, and she went out to see a man called Mr. Kipper, I kid you not, about a house, and she was never seen again. Oh, nobody knows where she is. Her body was never found. She's presumed now dead. You could look it up on the internet. There's lots of theories about who did it and why. But the fact of the matter is she never returned. And I was taught by the Susie Lamplugh Trust. And what was really interesting was that there was no check-in and check-out procedure. Everybody kept their own diaries. And there was no personal protection training. And again, in Facebook groups, I'm reading about organisations, placements who are asking students to go out on home visits without any form of what I would call initial reconnaissance, where usually what would happen is a senior member of the staff would look at the client, would arrange for therapy, and would write a report about anything that people needed to know. It's things like, if you're visiting someone's home, is it tidy? Are there electrical wires hanging around? What's the area like? It's sometimes not the client, but it's sometimes that the area is quite a dangerous place. What's it like at night? Is it different during the day? I went to a visit, and it woke me up. It wasn't a counselling visit. I used to be a support worker. I knocked on the door, and the person said, "Oh, come in." He said, "I'm glad you didn't get hold of the door handle. I've wired it up to the mains."
Oh, no.
Wired it up to the electricity grid, because I've had people banging on my door. And I said, "I think the visit's ended there." And I went back and reported it, and we had to do a risk assessment. And this is sometimes it's not the clients, it's what surrounds the clients. And I think that if you've got an organisation who hasn't got a robust loan working policy, then you shouldn't be loan working, because it is just too dangerous. Don't kid yourself. Please don't kid yourself that it'll be okay. It won't.
Yeah, it's just not taking the chance, is it?
It's not taking the chance, is it? Yeah.
Topic, protecting yourself as a therapist. Now, I really like this, and when you're speaking about those in-person visits, somebody phoning and being rude on the phone, or maybe video phoning and being nude, or the past topics, you're at a distance. You can put down the phone, you can block the number. It will be really, really unpleasant. But when you're there in person, you could be at risk. If something like that played out when you're there in person, how do you handle it? And the truth is, in that kind of a situation, it's very difficult to think, because your brain, cortisol will be released, and it's difficult to think and plan within the moment. And all we're saying is, have a think about it now. Have a think about it beforehand. Put your policies, your procedures in place. Speak to your peers about it. Speak to your supervisor. So that if, and I hope it never does, but if a situation ever does arise, the plan is already there. You're just going to be actioning and not having to think through it at a time of great stress. Great topic, Rory. Thank you for bringing that.
Yeah, and just one final point. One of the things when I was employed is they wouldn't take anybody on who'd done any martial arts. And the reason for that was because they thought that they might fall back on the martial arts quicker in a stressful situation than using soft skills to be able to exit. And many years ago, I was teaching someone who was a black belt karate person, and they said, "I haven't got any worries about this." We covered it in a class, and he said, "I've got a black belt in karate." And I said, "Okay, let's do a role play." And she said, "Are you sure, Rory? I could hurt you." I said, "Well, we'll just do a role play." So I said, "I'll be the person who's the aggressor, and you be the person with the martial arts." And she said, "Right." She got into a defensive position. It was very impressive, Ken. It was very impressive. And I said, "Are you ready?" And she went, "Yes." And I pulled my fingers out of my pocket like a pretend gun, and I went, "Bang, bang, you're dead."
Yeah.
And she went, "Oh, well, that's not fair." And I said, "First rule, there's no such thing as a fair fight." And I said, that's the reality. And I've certainly worked when I was a support worker where weapons have been found, knives, guns, there's a huge list. So please, we say stay grounded and stay safe. Please take that on.
Yeah. It's back to where do you sit in the therapy room? Can you access the exit? Can you get to the exit if something goes awry? Can your escape be blocked by the person? Yeah. It's going through all of that. Speak to your peers and speak to your supervisor. There it is. That's practice today. Into practice matters, and a really interesting one, Rory. You spoke to a interpreter, and I know you learned a lot from this. I remember you speaking to me afterwards and going, "Wow, I learned so much."
It was just one of those, oh my goodness moments, Ken. And it was such my goodness moment that actually I've recorded a long form interview with this person on all aspects of employing and retaining the services of an interpreter. Incredibly valuable information. and that will be released in the Counsellor CPD library, our library for qualified practitioners, in the next month or so. I'm just at the process of editing it now. A really, really, really interesting conversation. But you can get a flavour of this conversation where I caught up with Eniko Koncz, who is a interpreter, and this is what she had to say.
Practice matters.
As part of being a multicultural society, it is now not unusual for therapists to meet clients who may not speak the therapist's native language, or indeed the therapists speak the client's native language, which is why interpretation services are more and more being used within therapy. So I'm delighted to welcome Eniko Koncz, who is an interpreter, who's going to share some of her observations about being an interpreter both in the room and online. So, Eniko, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Rory.
So, first of all, how long have you been an interpreter?
I have been an interpreter for over 20 years now.
And I wonder what drew you to working in the area of counselling and psychotherapy. Was there any particular event, or were you just asked?
I was just asked. Like I get invited to interpret in hospital appointments. I sometimes get invited to work with counsellors, and increasingly so.
So I think for a lot of our audience listening, this may be kind of a new thing, if you like. So how would it usually work? Would you meet the counsellor and the clients at their at the practice or online? So just talk us through how it would usually work when you all first meet together.
Okay, so first of all, I would receive an interpreting booking, which happens either via email or via telephone confirmation, and I would find out where I would be meeting the counsellor. It's usually a talking therapy centre somewhere within my geographical region. But increasingly, I am invited to do my interpretation via a video link or via a telephone connection.
Yes, so you've embraced the online world, I guess. You know, since COVID, a lot of people have gone online. So you say increasingly you're working online with clients and therapists.
Because it's a much more flexible method. The difficulty with in-person interpretation, even though it has got a lot of advantages, is that the interpreter needs to travel to where the counsellor is meeting the client. And that can sometimes be quite costly. And it does not allow for a lot of flexibility in terms of allowing the interpreter enough time to book that appointment in, whereas video remote interpreting and telephone interpreting is instantaneous.
Yes, it is. And just for those people who may be wondering, what languages do you interpret for?
I interpret in my native language, Hungarian, and my near-native language, Russian, which is an acquired language for me. And both I use in a language pair with English.
So when you first meet the clients online, what's the procedure? Would you usually explain to the client what your role is? I mean, would the client first of all, I guess, would the client know what your role was if they're meeting a therapist and then you're there? Would the client know beforehand that you are the interpreter?
The counsellor would introduce me to the client. So the main contact is between the counsellor and the client. And I am like a second person in the room, whether virtually or in physical reality. So not all counsellors follow the same procedure, but in an ideal case, the counsellor will touch base with me before the actual therapeutic session. what I like and what's most helpful for me to be able to be an effective interpreter is to find out beforehand what kind of counseling therapy method the counselor is going to use, whether the counselor would like to share any written documents with me. I would sincerely recommend doing this little homework beforehand, because the first counseling session is usually about risk assessment. And that is usually happening around a written questionnaire. So if you as a counselor have anything like that to share with the interpreter, you can email it beforehand. It makes the process a lot smoother.
Yeah, so you have the ability to understand, I guess what will happen on that first session, and also how be in sight of the kind of information you may be asking the clients. You touched on the modality of therapy. Why is it important that the interpreter has an insight into the modality of therapy the therapist is using?
Working as an interpreter in therapy sessions is very special in the sense that usually an interpreter is expected to be completely neutral in their tone of voice and in their body language. However, in therapy sessions, I would say it's the only exception when the interpreter is advised to mirror to a certain extent the counselor's tone of voice and body language. Whether the interpreter is visible to the client is another matter. In-person interpretation, the interpreter is physically present. However, it can either aid the counseling process or it can inhibit the counseling process, depending on how the client is feeling. So sometimes it's a good idea to hide the interpreter to a certain extent, to have the interpreter present in the room only as a voice, as a friendly voice. To mitigate that three-way effect, which can make communication a lot smoother between the counselor and the client. So, for example, on video, I often ask the counselor at which point they would like me to switch myself off. And here I can come back to the modality of interpretation a little bit. So if we are dealing with psychotherapy, like, for example, ERDM, so the eye movement therapy.
EMDR, yes, yeah.
Yeah, so if the client is almost in a state of hypnosis, they close their eyes, they have to go back to a memory. Often it's best not to have the interpreter on the screen. So the counselor should be on the screen, but only vis-a-vis the interpreter. The client should be seated somewhere where I can't see them and they can't see me. That's what works best.
Oh, how interesting. And if you were working in the room, would you then consciously maybe sit at the back of the room?
Yes, the seating arrangement is quite crucial.
Yes, so that to all intents and purposes, the therapy session would be like a if you want to use this term, normal therapy session, where the client and the therapist would see each other, but you are providing the voice and the tonality of the client to the counsellor, and you're reflecting the counsellor's tonality back to the client. Would that be a useful summary?
Yes, I think that's a very good way of describing it. So I find that I can often help the client feel comfortable if there aren't two different tones of voice present. If I stay completely neutral, it might communicate that I'm kind of cold and detached from the situation. Obviously, overdoing it is not helpful either. So I need to be more neutral than the counsellor, but somewhere in between.
So that sounds like that's a real skill, because you're almost, well, you are. You're using the term interpreting, not just the language, but the emotion and the meaning that's conveyed within it, because it's not just the words, it's how it's presented language, isn't it?
That's right. And another interesting aspect is, as an interpreter, I need to be very skilled in note-taking, because what is really not helpful in a therapy session is if I need to interrupt that process of memory retrieval or memory reprocessing, revisiting something that's quite difficult. Clients don't know that they need to stop every now and then for me to interpret accurately what they are saying. So I need to let them get to a space where either the counsellor will helpfully stop them and allow me to step in and interpret, or I can politely ask for a pause.
That's an interesting point, because we're having a conversation and we've respectfully paused for each other through our interaction. But if there's a third person in the room, there could be a lot of information conveyed. And then when that pause that happens, or the counsellor says, looks across and says, can you interpret? You have to almost paraphrase what the client is saying, but keep the actuality of their words in mind. So I can understand why you'd have to make notes. That's an interesting point.
Well, it's one of the most crucial points, actually, because as an interpreter, what I'm not allowed to do, I'm not allowed to paraphrase.
Ah, right. So that's
because
useful.
The danger is that when I paraphrase or summarize, I will be applying my own filter, and I will be trying to make sense of maybe a disjointed thought. So I'm distorting what the client is saying. It's crucial for the counsellor to hear back what the client said word for word. That's one of the most important skills.
That's very, very interesting. So the interpreter doesn't paraphrase, they repeat verbatim, word for word, what the client has said. However, they may have to take notes on those words to be able to repeat them back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And another interesting aspect of using an interpreter, for example, when a counsellor sets up the first session with the client, names, for example, in different cultures might work completely differently than in English. If I look at my native language, Hungarian, women can take their husband's first name and surname and just have a little suffix at the end to show that they are the wife of somebody. And in order to set up a counseling session properly and welcome the client in that warm and friendly way, it's important the counselor understands how to address the client. So sometimes the interpreter's role is also to provide some kind of cultural clarification.
Again, a really, really interesting point, because, I think that sometimes when communicating with people of different countries or cultures or language speakers, we can put our own particular prism onto that. And as you say, there are cultural norms that need to be considered. I think that's a fascinating point. I want to pick up on the fact that, translating from English to another language, some of the words don't translate. Do you ever find that to be the case, that sometimes there's a word used in say, Hungarian that wouldn't translate at all into English? I'm thinking of the word Gestalt in German, where there's no real translation for it. It's the best translation would be a completion, but it's not exactly a verbatim translation.
Yeah, in those cases, I maybe repeat the word as gestalt and just say this literally means X, Y, Z, and in an understandable way, it means so and so. I mean, we always have to bear in mind when working with clients, we have to make the meaning understandable to them. So technical jargon sometimes requires a little bit of explanation, but the interpreter needs to make it very clear when it's not the counselor's words, it's not the client's words, but they are providing a clarification. So literally, I would say, to clarify, as an interpreter, I have to say so and so.
Now, there's two final questions that I think that our audience would want me to ask. The first is, how does confidentiality work when we're talking about translation? You say you take notes, and obviously you're hearing the client's stories. Are you a member of an ethical body or any kind of oversight, or is it just a case that there's a code of honor, if you like, with interpreters?
I think, especially in the United Kingdom, interpretation is a little bit an unregulated industry, in the sense that large interpreting agencies sign up to various codes of ethics. However, individual translators, even if they have a contract with their big translation agencies through whom they provide their services, no one really checks if the translator adheres to the published code of ethics of their body. One practical advice I can give to counselors is that if the interpretation happens in person, politely just ask the interpreter to hand over the notes at the end of the session and actually physically destroy the notes in front of them, so the interpreter knows and the client knows that it's been shredded. When the interpretation happens over the telephone or via video link, then it is, as you say, an code of honor which professional people will adhere to. There's a lot of sensitive information, but there you have it. I always destroy my notes, and that's what everybody should do.
I mean, I think that's answered really honestly and very succinctly. And I think that observation about if you're working, in the room with the interpreter, ask for the notes and destroy them in front of the client, I think is a very valuable piece of information. Finally, counselling is a emotionally demanding activity. We hear, very sad stories. Sometimes I'm going to use the word horrific stories from our clients. I just wonder how interpreters look after themselves emotionally.
Interpreters, like doctors, I think, get used to the emotional stress in some cases, but more like emotionally challenging situations. I think if you go into interpreting in counseling sessions, you should have the right frame of mind. You should be an empathetic person with a high sense of emotional intelligence. Otherwise, it can be a little bit hard to process the information and to come across as congruent, empathetic, humane, which is, I think, 70% of the success of the job.
Well, I think that's, again, a very comprehensive answer, and I think a very useful answer. If you're listening to this and you need translation from English into Hungarian or to Russian, we will put in Eniko's details into the show notes on the website, so you can have a look at those. But it just leaves me to say, Eniko Koncz, thank you so much for joining us.
Big thank you to Eniko. Thank you to you, Rory. Wow. It's a deep topic, things that we'd never even consider an interpreter. And we've spoken about it before, haven't we? Third person in the room, when we might need an interpreter. But now a lot more depth to that. This is the Counselling Tutor Podcast. This has been episode 267.
We started off in theory and practice, and we talked about building your CV. What do you need to do to get onto that next stage of your journey and maybe capture the work or the job that you've worked so hard to achieve? In practice today, we talked about protecting yourself as a therapist, a very timely conversation, and one that really needs attention. I think it's questions that need to be asked both to self, to your supervisor, and maybe to your peer group. And then finally, we ended with an interview with Eniko Koncz regarding interpretation and things that we may not even consider. And as always, and really especially after this episode, stay grounded and please stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counselor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counselor CPD Library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.